Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down some of history's biggest moments to really get at not just what happened, but why it was so important. Today, we are looking at a battle that really should have been a total massacre, but instead, it became one of the greatest upsets in military history.
So yeah, that's the big question, right? How on earth did an underdog, totally outmatched, win what might be the most decisive naval battle in all of history? We're talking about the Battle of Midway, a fight that completely flipped the script on World War II in the Pacific. And to really get how this happened, you first have to understand just how terrifyingly unstoppable the Japanese Empire looked at that moment.
All right, Section 1, an unstoppable Japanese fleet. And believe me, that subtitle says it all. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, they really did seem invincible. I mean, think about it. It's June 1942. The Japanese military is an absolute juggernaut. They've rolled across huge swaths of the Pacific, from Malaya to the Philippines, and their navy, well, it was hands down the most powerful, most experienced, and most feared naval force on the entire planet. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at the numbers. The Imperial Japanese Navy shows up with 4 veteran fleet carriers. These are the big dogs, the very same ones that hit Pearl Harbor. The US? They've only got 3. And here's the real kicker. Battleships. Japan has them. The US has 0. None. At least none that could get there in time. So if you're just looking at this on paper, it's not even a fair fight. It looks like a guaranteed Japanese victory, no question.
So what was Japan's goal? It was simple and it was brutal. Lure out and destroy America's few remaining aircraft carriers. See, a few months earlier, the U.S. had managed to launch a surprise bombing run on Tokyo, the Doolittle Raid. It didn't do much damage, but it was a massive embarrassment for the Japanese leadership. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was furious. He decided he had to crush the American carrier fleet for good to make sure that never happened again. And the bait for his trap? A tiny little island called Midway.
Okay, next up, Yamamoto's overconfident plan. The subtitle here is key, a complex trap designed for a predictable enemy. And let me tell you, this plan was incredibly complex. Yamamoto wasn't just planning an attack. He was orchestrating this massive, intricate trap meant to completely annihilate the U.S. Pacific Fleet once and for all. So here's how it was supposed to work. First, they launch a fake-out, a diversionary attack way up north in the Aleutian Islands, hoping to pull some of the U.S. Navy in the wrong direction. Then, bam, the main event, attack and invade Midway Atoll. They knew the U.S. couldn't let Midway fall, so that would force the American carriers to come sailing out to fight. And that's when the trap would spring. A massive hidden Japanese fleet, trailing behind the first wave, would just pop up out of nowhere and, boom, annihilate them. The whole thing was based on perfect timing, total secrecy, and the Americans acting exactly how they were expected to. But, and this is a huge but, this supposedly brilliant plan was built on some really, really bad assumptions. For starters, they were positive the U.S. carrier Yorktown was at the bottom of the ocean after a previous battle. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. They also just completely underestimated American grit and the will to fight back. And tactically, their forces were spread out all over the Pacific, so they couldn't actually support each other if things went sideways. But the single biggest, most fatal flaw of all, they were absolutely convinced their grand plan was a total secret.
Which brings us right to our next section, America's secret advantage. And yeah, you guessed it, we're talking about how code breaking turned what should have been an ambush into a brilliant counter-ambush. This is where the story gets really good.
Yeah, plain and simple. The Americans knew everything. Yamamoto's biggest problem wasn't a flaw in his ships or his tactics. It was the fact that a team of American codebreakers were essentially reading his mail. They had managed to crack enough of the Japanese naval code, JN-25B, to get the gist of what was coming. Now, this is one of my favorite parts of the story. It's like something out of a spy movie. The codebreakers at Station Hypo in Hawaii could tell the Japanese were planning a huge operation, and they were pretty sure the main target, which was codenamed AF, was Midway Island. But they had to be 100% certain, so they came up with this genius low-tech trick. They had the base at Midway send out a message in the clear, an unencrypted message anyone could read, saying their water purification system was broken. Sure enough, a little while later, they intercepted Japanese coded message saying, you guessed it, AF is short on water. Got 'em, the target was confirmed. And just like that, the entire game flipped. Now it was the American commander, Admiral Chester Nimitz, who held all the cards. He knew the target, he knew the date, he knew exactly what ships the Japanese were bringing. He was setting a trap for the trappers.
and he gathered his 3 carriers, including the USS Yorktown, the one the Japanese thought was sunk, which had been miraculously patched up in a shipyard in just 3 days, with workers going around the clock. The trap was well and truly set. And that brings us to the moment of truth, 6 minutes that changed the war. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, everything was about to go down. The Japanese fleet steamed forward, launching its first wave of planes to bomb Midway Island, totally, blissfully unaware that just over the horizon, the entire American carrier fleet was waiting for them, ready to pounce. So the morning of the battle was just absolute chaos for the Japanese. Their first attack on Midway didn't quite finish the job, so the Japanese commander, Admiral Nagumo, orders his crews to rearm the planes for a second strike on the island. But then, right in the middle of all this, a scout plane finally spots the American fleet. Panic! Now they have to switch all the bombs back to torpedoes to attack the ships. The flight decks are a total mess of bombs, torpedoes, fuel lines, and right into this chaos fly the American torpedo bombers. These guys were incredibly brave, but it was basically a suicide mission. They were slow, they were outgunned, and they got torn to pieces by the Japanese Zero fighters. They didn't score a single hit. But, and this is crucial, they did something incredibly important. They dragged all of those Japanese fighter planes down to sea level to shoot them down. And by pulling the Japanese fighter cover down to the waves, they left the skies above the Japanese carriers completely empty. And this is where chance, or fate, or just sheer dumb luck steps in. At that exact moment, a squadron of American dive bombers, who are actually lost and almost out of fuel, just happened to stumble across the Japanese fleet. They arrived at the single worst possible moment for the Japanese. The carrier decks were a mess, packed with armed and fueled planes. They were quite literally floating powder kegs just waiting for a spark. And who was there to witness it? In a wild twist of irony, it was Mitsuo Fuchida, the very same pilot who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was on the deck of the flagship Akagi, and he described what he saw. "Helldivers, I looked up to see 3 black enemy planes plummeting towards our ship. It was too late." 4. That's the number that changed everything. In just 6 minutes, think about that, 6 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 main carriers, the Agaki, Kaga, and Soryu, were hit, burning from end to end and completely doomed. The last one, the Hiryu, managed to get a counterstrike off that would eventually sink the American Yorktown, but it was a last gasp. By the end of the day, American planes found the Hiryu 2 and sent it to the bottom. In a single day, all 4 of the veteran carriers from the Pearl Harbor attack were gone. So this is the big takeaway, the Pacific's turning point. We're talking about an irreversible shift in the balance of naval power, because Midway wasn't just another battle. It was the moment the entire war in the Pacific pivoted. This wasn't just a victory for the US, it was the absolute annihilation of the core of Japan's naval power. And this chart just lays it out in stark, simple terms. Look at this. Japan starts the battle with 4 fleet carriers. They end it with 0. The US starts with 3 and ends with 2, after losing the heroic Yorktown. But here's the difference. America's shipyards were already cranking out new carriers at an incredible rate. Japan, on the other hand, they had just lost the very heart of their navy, and they couldn't replace it. And the final numbers are just staggering. 4 Japanese carriers lost to America's 1. But it's not just the ships. Look at the personnel. Over 3,000 Japanese killed, compared to around 300 Americans. And hidden in that number for Japan is the most devastating loss of all. Hundreds of their best, most experienced, battle-hardened pilots. You can eventually build new ships and new planes. You can't just instantly create pilots with that level of skill and experience. That loss was crippling. And really, that's the core of why Midway was the turning point. Japan had hit its peak. Its industry just couldn't keep up with these kinds of losses. The United States, on the other hand, it was an industrial giant that was just getting warmed up. After this battle, the momentum, the strategic initiative, it all shifted to the Allies, and it would never shift back. The path to places like Guadalcanal and eventually to Tokyo was now open. It's no wonder the great historian John Keegan called it, quote, the most stunning and decisive blow in the history of naval warfare. You just can't overstate how huge this was. It was a total 180 reversal of fortune, and it was won through a combination of brilliant intelligence, incredible courage, and yeah, a whole lot of luck. So we'll leave you with this question to think about.
What if the codebreakers had failed? What if that simple, clever trick with the water purifier hadn't worked? The American fleet would have sailed blindly into Yamamoto's perfect trap. The war in the Pacific, and maybe even the entire course of the 20th century, could have looked, well, completely different. It just goes to show you how sometimes a few people in a basement office can truly change the world.